All right. Thank you everyone who's joined us for this session. We just do a quick round of introductions today and then we'll get into the topic. So I'm Shashank Mehta. I'm part of the founding team and currently leading the Razorpay's neo-banking initiative, which is Razorpay X. So that's what I do. We'll just quickly go through in rounds over here. We'll start with Utsav, one line of introduction, and then we'll get into the discussion directly.
So I had AngelList in India. It's a startup platform to fundraise, recruit, and launch. I do some personal investing from my micro fund called iSeed.
Thank you. Vidit, we'll go with you next.
Hey guys, I'm Vidit Atre. I'm the founder and CEO of Meesho. Meesho is India's largest social commerce platform that lets women start their own stores online, especially on social platforms such as WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. And as of today, we have about 9 million women who run their own stores like across the country, get financial independence and a professional identity through our platform. Great
That's
to be here.
fantastic, and we'll get into a bit more of that too. But before that, Rajat, if you could have your introduction also, please.
Hey guys, I'm Rajat. I lead fintech at Matrix. We have managed about $1 billion in India. Uh, Very fortunate to be seed investors in Razorpay. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, and very happy to have Matrix in our journey. Great. So thanks everyone who's joined in today. What we want to do is have a quick and frank discussion with this group. We've got investors and we've got a leading startup in the panel itself. And what we wanted to do today was quickly kind of take a look at how the budget impacts the startup ecosystem. We want to keep it less on the general gyanbazi that, okay, everything is looking great, everything is in a V-shaped recovery. We want to kind of discuss a lot of the specifics today. So that's what we're going to do. With this panel, I plan on kind of going into a bunch of topics, certain announcements that have been made which impact the startups, and at the same time, certain announcements that we wish probably were made or we wish that could have been kind of announced. But let's get started with, I think, the insurance sector, because they've had a big announcement, right? That they've completely gone from a 49% FDI to 74%. This increases the foreign investments that can come in. Maybe we can kind of first get started, Rajat, from your perspective. And I think, Utsav, you've invested in certain insurtech companies also, right? How do you think that this industry will start shaping up now that there is FDI at a higher rate? Because last time when it went from 25 to 49, we did see a lot of foreign investments coming in. So what do you think is up ahead for insurtech?
I think it's fantastic for especially the own insurance companies who are licensed insurers. So people like Acco and Digit, it's just a fantastic news. I think Diwali has come way too early, or Holi has come very early for these companies. They've been waiting for it for a while. In fact, every fundraise has been tough because getting that much amount of domestic capital is just very hard. So for some of these large guys, it's just going to be very interesting, and but hopefully that should keep spawning the innovation that these guys are doing really on the product front or on distribution front, where they'll have more capital to actually build it out. So that's going to be very interesting. I think what's also going to happen is, now that like I've been speaking to one or two global insurance companies who've not come to India yet because they want to be a majority owner of the enterprise in India. So we should also see new insurance companies and global competition coming to India with this new change. So it should be interesting on what happens and how the landscape plays out with more competition coming in.
So I think insurance. I mean, we're super underpenetrated in the country in terms of insurance and health insurance. Of course, I mean, car and auto is still mandated compulsory by the government, but I think health can definitely take a boost. I think we're just 2-3% in the country, and I think a lot of players, not the full stack ones which Rajat mentioned, Acco and Digit, but some neo insurance players which sort of latch on as a broker to some existing insurance provider and repackage it in a sort of a new way and try to sell it to other people, mostly to employees or corporates, and try different routes of customer engagement and sort of acquisition. So interesting to see what that'll do. But even in this 74%, there's a fine print that says, I think the fine print was that you will still have to retain control in India or something. So what actually gets notified as a policy, I think, is a very, so budget is one thing, but I think policy and that I think where it meets the road, I think is rubber meets the road is kind of yet to be seen. And
how much of an impact do you think in reality it will happen for these startups, right? Especially I think the ones that you've kind of invested in, right? Can you probably talk about that? Where does the aggregator angle kind of come in over here, and where does the insurance provider angle itself come in, and how would some of the realities start shaping in?
So to be honest, I think everyone's bullish about this. I think a lot of the neo insurance players were looking to get a full stack license. So I think a few companies like Bima Pay and stuff, which are in the Y Combinator patch as well. So they were earlier thinking that if they should just be an information aggregator or a provider, but how do they transition into building a stronger balance sheet to apply for the IRDA A license? So I think now those avenues actually open up, and now I think foreign investment in this aspect will sort of ease up definitely. So
Sounds
that,
good.
I mean, overall mood is positive.
Yep, and I think InsurTech anyways has been seeing a lot of the VC fund flow coming in the last 1 year, probably going to shape up. And I think as you mentioned, right, and I think I also mentioned that it's very underpenetrated. Maybe I think with it, if you can probably help us understand really the impact of insurance and maybe the lack of insurance availability, given that I think with the 9 million women entrepreneurs, I'm guessing access to insurance would definitely be a value add that you probably want to introduce on your platform.
Yeah, and like to be very frank, I'm not an expert in this topic, but I'll still share basis what we know. And we have, I think a couple of years ago, we've done some pilots where we said that, hey, penetration of insurance in India is pretty low. Can we give an opportunity to our entrepreneurs to even sell some of these products, right? And from a demand standpoint of view, I think there was a lot of potential demand where people just don't understand these products. Someone needs to come and explain, should they do it, not do it, etc. Why did we not continue with this at that point in time is like our users are generally not the most, I would say, aware about some of these things, and we kind of struggle to kind of get them up and scaling this up. So that's why I don't have a very strong POV on this, but I'll say on the same lines as Utsav said, right? The penetration of insurance in India is extremely low. So anything that you can do to kind of boost either investments in startup or anything else, it's just gonna bring it up. So I think that's super positive.
Sounds good. I think so. Yeah, I think insurance is one sector we are looking at a lot of fund flow kind of coming in, right? But related to that, I think another sector that I want to talk about is the e-commerce side of things itself. Government has talked about the gig workers and they want to kind of create some kind of social security net for them. And we've seen already in California what happened, right? That when you get them into classifying them as employees and what started happening, companies said that they cannot cater to the unit economics anymore. A lot of issues kind of also happened, but on one end, the government is trying to protect these the gig workers. This is still an announcement phase. I think the government wants to do like a general sense of what they should create and then create a policy. But there are multiple opportunities that open up and then multiple challenges that open up, right? So how do you folks think about what could happen in the e-commerce sector, especially if gig worker compliance is similar to US probably comes out in India? How do you think a lot of the Indian economy, which was running on gig workers during the lockdown particularly, how do you think that's going to get impacted going forward? Open to anyone.
Vidit might have an interesting take on this.
Yeah, so we don't have gig workers, as you say, on our platform. But I would say, I think my sense is the big pro is it should attract more people to kind of become gig workers, right? Because right now it's not very protected. So a lot of people, like, as soon as you start to think that some of your friends will start to do it, they start to have questions around what kind of benefits I have when I'm working in a company. All of these things exist, otherwise they don't. So I'm sure this will create a safety net, and a lot more people would be more willing to kind of do this. But devil is always in the details, right? So when some of these compliances come in, what do you have to do, what do you not have to do, how big a headache it becomes for some of these companies? Do they find ways around circumventing some of this because the cost just makes the economics unviable? I don't know, right? So I think some of that will unfold when some of this clarity comes in. We have to wait for it. I just like the sentiment is right. They want to formalize the sector so that they accept it, okay, hey, this is happening, and we need to just create a safety net over time so that we protect these guys so people feel comfortable doing this. But sentiment generally does not solve everything, right? So execution matters a lot. So we will see how it comes out when the details are open.
So one of the, I think, discussion points that will keep coming up is the socialist versus capitalist mindset, right? Like, should this be mandated? Should this be something that the company should be mandated to kind of do, or something they should kind of make it part of their business plan itself? How do you think? What do you think on this point? Because there's a lot of sentiments going around on this.
So I think very interesting. So I think what happened, I think what triggered probably this globally is that, I mean, free market forces for gig workers didn't work. I think we saw Uber, Ola give crazy amount of incentives. And then just when that came off, really just to incentivize user and supply, create the, I mean, solve the marketplace problems. That's when I think people were falsely educated that they would have a livelihood, which they were, I mean, having right now because of incentives. And then that got pulled out. So I think it's probably a trigger from that. to be honest. So free market forces in this case just does not apply because the gig workers are typically fairly uneducated, and most of the platforms which bring onto them to use a supply for providing services and stuff just typically don't help them in upscaling in all aspects, financial aspects of financial planning and all of those things. So I think it can be a welcome move to just sort of bring some level of protection to them. I know it's a big debate about capitalistic versus socialist, but I think providing equal education and opportunities to everyone also, I think, is the need of the hour.
I think it will be mandated. If you read the tea leaves, whatever has been happening so far, it will just happen. I just hope, as Vidit was saying, that there is, when we look at the details, I hope it's done after more discussions with the industry, and B, there is time for compliance, which is given, which is reasonable. Because for sure, compliance burden is going to increase, but by and large, it should be positive. Look, as long as the field is set properly and it's equal for people, businessmen will always innovate and figure out, how to build their business models around it. There might be short-term pain, but long-term it will be very beneficial for the sector. As Vidit was saying, more people will join and so on.
Right. I think, Rajat, one of the interesting things that you'd spoken about when we had earlier generally caught up was around the second order effects of any decision, right? That when you take the decision, something happens in the first order and the second order, right? And if you look at this change, one aspect is the unit economics, that you have to serve this industry, you have to serve these compliances, there's a cost element to it, right? But it also probably opens up new opportunities and markets, right? For example, the entire HR space around the blue collar workers, how do you kind of solve for those problems? It's probably a market that will open up. So any interesting investing thesis that you think will come up because of the budget and new opportunities?
Yeah, specifically to this gig one, look, as soon as you formalize this, a lot of opportunities emerge, right? So obviously HR and helping people get jobs, or gig platforms which can just help you find other gig jobs becomes interesting. Financial services becomes real. It's already happening in some shape or form, but this gets even more formalized, because you can easily track and figure out what's happening in their day-to-day lives. So all of those opportunities will come, and that's why I think for overall over a period of time, this will be very positive. Similarly, if you look at other things like this budget was very heavily focused on physical infrastructure development, right? Or whether it's roads, railways. I think overall spending is going up by 30-40% versus the previous budget. And it will have ripple on effects on logistics, mobility, travel, tourism, all of that, right? And we've seen how it happened back in the day when when reforms started happening on physical infrastructure, the Vajpayee government and all. This will just happen in most states now. It is very, very positive to see.
You've seen impacts in maybe in some of the previous budgets where something like this has happened, and maybe there have been startups which have been able to seize the opportunity itself.
Yeah, I would say I don't know budgets or not, but all these Revigos of the world, or all the logistics startups are there today because fundamental road infrastructure has improved significantly more than what it was, right? Or if you take a road trip in Gujarat, it's the road infrastructure is just so much better. I hope they do something about Bangalore roads, but you know that's what will drive the economy, right? It will drive job creation, and it will drive businesses to come and use the public infra.
I think that's a great point, right? To improve the productivity and startup space, just fix the Bangalore roads first. That's going to help a lot with the productivity for startups. Right. Before I close on the gig workers topic, I think Vidit, I just want to kind of get a sense from you, right? That with this 9 million entrepreneurs base that you have, definitely there is one aspect of opening up opportunities for them and all of those pieces, right? I want to understand from you, how does Meesho look at its responsibility towards these 9 million entrepreneurs? It could be just that, okay, we are opening up these opportunities, creating this wealth creation kind of opportunity for them, or you believe that there is more to it, right? So how do you think about what is Meesho's responsibility towards this base that you have?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And by the way, our philosophy has always been like being a platform that connects opportunities to them, right? And that means, hey, you're looking to kind of start up your business, you need access to the right products, we'll help you get that. You need access to the right infrastructure around logistics payments, we'll help you kind of get that. You need the right tools, we'll help you kind of get that. Some of this responsibility changed a lot, especially when the COVID lockdown happened, because the primary thing went off and it was really bad, right? Like a lot of their spouses lost jobs. They could not sell because e-commerce was banned. So there was no income coming in the house. At that time, we started to think about what can we make work right now so that they start to make some income and support their family in these hard times. So, for example, at that time, we figured out that, hey, a lot of frontline workers needed masks, right? So we said that, hey, you go and like sew mask with old clothes that you have. We will buy it from you. We'll pay you, and then we'll kind of get it to the workers on the front line. It was something that we had never done. We pulled it off in like a week because we wanted to figure out and get an opportunity to them so that they can essentially make some income at that time when nothing else was working. Apart from this, we said that, hey, like it was, again, it's something that we can't like regularly do, but at that time what we said, can we give them like access to short term loans, and we gave it from our balance sheet. We said, hey, you take this, you don't, there's no timeline, we will figure out when you start to come back and sell, we will try to take some of it from the income you make gradually over time, but you take this money right now, right, and try to support your family. So some of these are very ad hoc measures because like you don't plan for a lockdown. I don't think any of them had. But the way we think about a responsibility is a platform that connects them with the right opportunities. And as a business, we keep thinking about what's right for them, what do they want. So we started with one category, expanded over time to almost everything which concerns them. We've tried categories that are like way beyond what we generally do just to see whether it fits with them or not. But that's how we think about our like responsibility towards them.
Great. I think my entire experience, I think, with this community has just been through the lockdown period, right? I think they demonstrated the resilience more than anything else, and it's not even lip service, right? It's actually that the country was running on top of these services that were available during lockdown. In fact, I remember within my society there were people who they were running some of these shops, they were becoming access to a lot of these items still, and I'm guessing a lot of them were powered by Misho, so that was fantastic to see. With this, let me get into some of the direct aspects around startups that was released in this budget. And frankly, this time there wasn't a lot, right? We didn't see too many items which were startup focused. But I want to probably go to you, Utsav, first. And you've been making a lot of these angel investments, a lot of companies that you kind of put money into, right? One of the biggest fanfare programs for India was the India Startup Program, where you register as a recognized startup, you get certain benefits in terms of the taxes that you have to pay and all the other angel taxes and everything, right? Can you talk about how this has over time helped startups? What's the number of companies that you've invested even go ahead and apply for it? And what are the benefits that they're even getting out of this?
To be honest, I think everyone recommends them to apply. I think in India, it takes a day or two just to apply. If you're an Indian private limited company, it's an online DIPP portal which these things and get that thing because angel tax is one of the bigger advantages of that. So you might raise capital from private angels or private funds or private investment vehicles in India, and that just saves you a lot of tax hassles in the future, which can come like 2, 3 years down the line if you're running or even not running your startup by then. And I think the other things are not that relevant. I think there was a statistic which was released that out of 7 years, I think you can get a tax break for X number of years. And I mean, I think only 100 startups have typically taken that tax break. So, and tax break is only available if you're actually paying taxes or eligible to pay taxes if you're making a profit. So that was, I think, not that relevant for majority of this thing, even though they've extended it by a year in this budget as well. So to be honest, it's not going to have too much impact on the startups. I think one other thing which people have, they've done in the budget is that elimination of, delaying long-term capital gain tax if you're investing in startups. So that registration, if you're registered with the Startup India program, then your investors, some of the angels who have long-term capital gain tax to offset, can use that. So I think that's another benefit for investors or companies looking to attract capital.
But I think the most interesting part is this, right? That this is complete online portal as befits the startup ecosystem that's being served, and the fact that you get it in like 1, 2 days probably has helped the most, right? Otherwise, I think most people generally, when they think of some of these bodies and registrations, they imagine the long queues. So I think it's good to hear that most of the people are actually registering.
All of this is part of how do we bring onshore all the startups which are incorporating offshore. I think that is, I think, one broad theme I think everyone's trying to figure out by letting Indian startups list overseas and just so many different things which they're trying to do. So I think that'll be a very interesting trend to see. I mean, budget is, of course, coming at a time when this budget is coming at a time when the entire economy is in a contraction phase. So not too much attention was given to sort of the startups. But I hope that changes with, activity on the sidelines.
And that's an interesting point that you bring, right? I think generally what I've seen a lot of the Y Combinator startups, for example, they end up re-registering in the US markets or in Singapore and then creating subsidiaries in India. In fact, this has almost become the norm. Most startups tend to operate in this particular manner. And if I take a very patriotic, nationalistic view, right, that our startups from India focusing on India market, they're raising capital abroad, they're getting only operational money in. Yes, they raise capital and everything, but what will it really take for us to have like a entire ecosystem within India? Like, why do we need our startups to go abroad and register over there? How do we get that back into India?
With it,
Both of you should go tell YC that. Vidit and Shashank, both of you need to do this. No, look, actually, you don't need, right? So there are a bunch of companies in our portfolio otherwise as well who are domiciled in India, and at least from a, traditionally it was talked about that if you're registered abroad, it's easier to raise capital. I don't think that's as relevant today. Both from an angel perspective, as Anup, always talks about how much is happening on angel list, how many angel investments are happening there. But so even for early stage as well as late stage investing, it's becoming much, much better. So yeah, something that needs to be relooked at, and unless whether you all have a different point of view.
I think liquidity or exit is probably, I think entry is probably not the problem. I think exit is the problem of concern, I think, with incorporating overseas. I think that's becoming a thing.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that?
So some of the companies you need to file taxes. There's retrospective, like a Global versus Flipkart case in point, and so many different interpretations of the law in itself, right? Amazon versus what's going on right now. It becomes really tricky to take money out. I think there are a few Y Combinator startups which tried to, they got an exit, but just to get the tax credits for that in the US, they've been having a hard time. So I think many such cases come up which just make it. And even listing overseas right now is not allowed for private companies.
Yep.
Yep. Exit is probably the concern where they're looking at it from.
So it still seems to be from a perspective that, look, if you want to keep your options open, then why not just go ahead and register in US? Especially, I think there are programs which allow you to register while being in India, never having to go there. So probably makes it easier for a lot of companies to do it.
And SaaS billing and all of those, SaaS and enterprise customers, they're selling globally, so they prefer to register overseas. I think it's just a nightmare to move money in and out of India as well if you're an Indian family.
Yeah, that one makes a lot of sense. If you have global operations and all, that makes a lot of sense to have domicile somewhere else.
Great, awesome. I think one point that you touched upon, Utsav, was the fact around listing itself, right? And I think there are some eminent Indian IPOs that I think a lot of people are waiting for. Flipkart news keeps coming in again and again. I think Zomato is another company which is looking to IPO. And a lot of these companies probably want to ride on the retail investors India wave also, right? That, look, they have a lot of goodwill in India. Flipkart, I think being a Singapore entity can still do it. I think Zomato is largely an Indian entity and they are looking for an IPO probably in India, right? At least some statistics say that about 30 to 35 Indian startups, tech startups, which are kind of probably looking to do, right? But as you mentioned, there's still no clear guidelines. There's still no dual listing that's allowed. Something was supposed to come out last year. It didn't happen. Even this budget did not even really talk about it, right? How do you think that's probably going to shape up in the next 1 to 2 years? Do you think that there are certain IPOs that we might see in the India segment itself, in the Indian stock market? Will that happen probably?
So SEBI's been trying to do this innovative growth platform where they're trying to list, ease out the restrictions to list. But I think some of the restrictions to list in India just don't make it worth the while. Take apart from the fact that investor liquidity or appetite for such loss-making startups does not exist in India as well, probably not, or hasn't been tested yet. I think that is another concern. But yeah, the listing requirements, I haven't studied them recently, but they keep on coming out with white papers which have not been clarified or made into policy discussions or engaged with the true community in itself. I think they're the bigger fish to fry in terms of just listing the old traditional businesses which are keeping them busy for now. Rajat might have a different take.
No, so, I think this is the number one thing that if this gets solved for the startup ecosystem, I think it will just unlock so much of value for investors, for early employees. And it will just, close the loop from investment to exit will start happening. But the issue for IPOs is, as Utsav was saying, that most of these tech companies are unprofitable, unfortunately, right now, which is the case even in the US, right? But unprofitable companies can list overseas, right? But not in India. So So far, the rule is if you are listing overseas, you also need to list in India, right? So that's the dual listing that they force you to do. Which in the latest white paper there were, talks about, or latest discussions there were talks about should that dual listing be a required thing or not. If that requirement goes away, I think a bunch of Indian companies will just go list overseas because capital markets are very deep in the US and so on. People are used to looking at businesses which are growing very fast but are unprofitable and are investing in growth. Um, and they can create value for all their shareholders as well as raise primary capital, right? But if that dual listing continues, I think you will still see IPOs in India. Like I think Zomato will happen. I think in our portfolio, Ola will happen at some point of time. Five Star will happen in our portfolio. But all of these will be, on the back of strong profitability and so on, right? Which will obviously reduce the consideration set significantly.
But what seems to be the downside? Like, for example, what do you think are the reasons why the government isn't easily kind of thinking about this and moving forward on this? Why do you think that it's not going as quickly as it probably should?
I don't know, man. Maybe it is investor protection or what. I honestly don't know. Um, but if this needs to change.
Got it. I think just going back to the previous discussion, right? Just till the time that exit angle is probably not sorted very easily, and as Utsav mentioned, that for a lot of companies or the investors where they've exited companies, taking the returns out from India has been a challenge. It just seems like that the default option would be that you register outside. US, Singapore seems to be like the favorites in this space. And with that, I probably want to understand from you, right? Meesho is easily one of the very well-funded startups. Quite a lot of money that has been raised. How do you generally look at managing the capital, and have there been challenges around taxations, around dealing with the government authorities on some of these pieces, or has it largely been that okay, it's something that we know how to tackle and go forward with?
Like, to be very frank, I think if I look back last 3-4 years, the kind of issues I've seen around, one is what Utsav was talking about, angel tax, right? Since we were registered in the US, we never had that issue. Like I know a lot of my friends who are trying to, like for example, wrap up their company. They had these notices. They spent much more money, like lakhs and lakhs of money, on lawyers to kind of get that sorted before it was solved. Right now, I think a lot of startups haven't gone public, but when they start to do it, and you realize that hey, because of whatever is happening globally, maybe cost of capital in public markets is cheaper than maybe private markets. Debt is much cheaper right now, so a lot more people will start to go outside. Okay, hey, I don't want to be in India because I want to list right now. Even if we are unprofitable, get access to this capital. Why should we stay private longer? Like this is not 5 years ago, right? Like all of this could change very soon. So I would say, like, if as an entrepreneur, why would you like kind of take a risk and then like set up your company here? If you're seeing that all people who have started like kind of scale their companies, they have kind of either domiciled their company in Singapore or US. Why should you kind of do it in India? So I would say, like, I think government has a responsibility to make sure that they make everyone comfortable around. Okay, hey, we are making sure things are sorted. Because I remember like all of this, by the way, happened in our case. We didn't even know about this. YC forced us, okay, hey, why don't you do this in the US? Because we won't fund you if you are set up in India. We said, okay, fine. And 1 year later, we realized we were like quite like we did it right because we did not have any angel takes issue, and all of our friends who took money in the Indian companies in India were struggling about it. So I thought like we did a good job, right? So at the end of the day, this is the thing that everyone will struggle with, which is you have these issues, you have exit issues, all of this needs to be solved. Otherwise, entrepreneurs will go wherever it's easier. Even apart from this, by the way, even though we feel that hey, most people feel comfortable coming and directly investing in India, that's true for most people who have a history of investing in India, right? I still meet people who are kind of looking to enter into India, and they keep talking about, hey, there's so many news about retrospective tax policies changing so frequently. We have to think so much about it. If you are a delivery company, it's very easy for us to kind of do it, right? So all these are barriers. You need to kind of get rid of them. So as an entrepreneur, if you take my perspective, I would say people shouldn't even think about it. They should go and set it up outside of India until like all these issues are sorted out.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? That this is the default seem to be structured in this way right now, and I think there's a lot that needs to be done to change the defaults, right? I think Utsav, I want to kind of come back to you, right? You have through the AngelList platform, I think you get exposure to so many different startups. Are you seeing some kind of changes happening in the kind of companies are listing in India, like registering in India, for example, versus still doing it in US? And how easy is it for startups which, let's say, are listed outside of India to raise, let's say, angel funds within India? Because as far as I understand, the money transfer itself is a nightmare when you have to invest in a foreign startup, even though it's India focused.
True. So, I mean, Jan's been the best month ever. I think we've closed one investment a day on the platform on AngelList, India, and we've not even we've lost out on all the SaaS deals and enterprise deals just because they're registering in the US. So we don't actually invest in Indian companies, but which are sort of incorporated overseas, just because we're registered and regulated by SEBI. To get a SEBI permission to invest in an overseas company as a fund, as an angel fund or a SEBI registered fund, it takes typically 2 to 3 months, and they ask you a long list of questions, which just doesn't make sense. That I mean, you can't hold up the founder with the without even giving a guarantee that hey, the funds might come just because we're stuck at SEBI's doorstep. And even as an angel to send money, there's a restriction called LRS, liberalized remittance scheme, which they use to send money overseas. And that also, I mean, it becomes tricky in a round tripping tax concern, because technically you're just adding a shield of sort of extra layer and then bringing the money back. Can be interpreted in multiple ways, depends on how small or big the transaction is. So all of those things are open to discussion, but not that easy as an angel sitting in India to invest overseas, basically.
Yep.
One of our seed funded companies are looking to raise angel money. They really liked this guy, and he essentially said, "Dude, I can't do it this year. I finished my LRS limit."
Oh wow. Yeah, because LRS limit, I think for individuals right now, they keep on changing. It was increased to 250K. That also has, I mean, your personal travel expenses, health insurance, and all of those I mean, everything comes under that, overseas education and stuff. So, yeah.
And we work with a lot of startups, even on our neobanking platform, right, which are trying to kind of, even in their foreign entities, when they've taken the funding, then they're trying to get the money into Indian entity. And of course, it is not covered in the LRS, the amounts that they're trying to get. And the sheer amount of paperwork that needs to be done, managed, filled in to get your money in and then start using it, it's a big pain. In fact, we find a lot of founders preferring to keep the money in the US account so that for all their expenses on Slack, G Suite, etc., they just directly do with it, try and get in as minimum as possible to India, because the entire experience around pulling in money has been a big challenge. And I think that's something that we at least want to solve for, that how do we help startups easily get money in and run their operational finances without any such overheads. But I think this is one space that we hope that things change very quickly on the banking side particularly. But to give an update, I think there have been updates coming in terms of a digital system where the money remittances can be managed. Instead of paperwork, you can do it in a digital fashion. But of course, the uptake, the rollout, everything is quite slow. So until then, I think startups will continue to struggle with this space. Now,
looks like we need Razorpay to build a product.
Definitely. And I think startups are definitely a segment we want to solve this for. We believe very heavily in them, of course. Right. So coming to, I think, from the investments in startups to the wealth generation for employee side of things, right? I think another piece that everyone has been hoping to hear for very long and still has not happened is the taxation around ESOPs. One of the biggest challenge around ESOPs is the taxation that happens on unrealized gains. The moment you exercise, you have to pay the difference on the exercise amount minus whatever is the fair market value. And you've not realized any gains. You've got no stocks, you've got no cash, you're paying to buy these cash, but you have to pay these taxes, right? How do you think this impacts the startup ecosystem in India and the value that employees put on ESOPs? And maybe I think with it, we can start from you in terms of how do you employees at your company think about this? How this challenge has been perceived by them, and what do you think should be done in this space?
Yeah, again, by the way, like I don't even know some of these challenges because everyone in the company gets share of the US entity, right? So a lot of these details change again. But I have heard from so many other folks, like this doesn't make sense to me, right? Like why, like this is the only superpower a lot of startups have, especially in the beginning, to attract more and more people to the company. When you can't pay them their market salaries, you want to make sure that you attract them by paying ESOPs. And now when you impose a liability, something like this, it just again creates hesitation in minds of people who could come and join you. So I think, and a lot of people don't even understand this, by the way. Like to some people, I think some companies now have exemption who are part of Startup India registration. Some companies are not. Not everyone is covered. So there's so much confusion around this as well. I don't know a lot of this clarification has come or not in the recent times. But just again, it's a mess. Like someone needs to just go deep, understand, hey, what do startups need, how do we encourage the ecosystem, and then how do we bring this clarity, how do we have at least the same policy for all companies, and how do we make them friendly for employees if they want to take ESOPs. I think both things need to be solved here.
I think even with the US talks that are issued to the employees, there's still the taxation aspect apply. Like for example, for us at Razorpay, we get the Razorpay Inc. ESOPs that are offered. But given the taxation regimes and the dual taxation, we still have to pay those taxes. And the challenge that I've seen, I think with the peer groups, and Razorpay has done multiple buybacks, right? The challenge has always been that people exercise and they sell because of the fact that for the remaining part that they've exercised, they have to pay the fair market value taxation. And especially for people when they're exercising, this comes into their general gains, not into their capital gains or long-term capital gain, which means it comes into the highest tax bracket. And especially for companies where the FMV has increased a lot, you've not exercised for quite some time, the amount becomes quite significant. Employees have to shell out a lot of it. So general trend that I have seen is that employees prefer to exercise only when there's a buyback happening. And we still don't see an environment where a lot of buybacks are happening. There are still limited companies which are doing it, although it's increased, but still limited around this. Rajat, how do you look at this from Matrix perspective?
It's a pain. There is no easy solution, and that's all. Again, big ask from the government to try and find a solution. I think I may be wrong on this, but there are ways to potentially do this via trust structure in India. And I don't know enough. Most companies don't end up doing it because it's a nightmare to manage, operationally complex, or at least I think it's also the problem of capital gains, etc. The issue is the day you exercise, your clock starts from that day, and if you've exercised after several years, it's a problem. So there are no easy solutions, but potentially more creative heads need to sit together and figure this out.
No, so we've actually, for AngelList India, we first launched EquityList.co, which is actually making it transparent for employees. We've gone live in US as well, now in India as well. India was our first market, and now we've gone live in Singapore and US as well for people to manage their this thing, and employees have a complete understanding of what the taxation looks like for them if they start exercising right now, or what if a future scenario modeling for employees as well in case the company value increases. So for them to help with tax planning and stuff. So we're trying to do whatever we can in terms of the education. With over 100 companies in India are using it now.
And is it possible, observe that we might see some kind of a secondary market opening up also along with this, that there's more liquidity available for the employees? Maybe something that EquityList itself can probably enable?
I think a lot of people discussed it. Even Karta is doing this in US, Karta X. But the problem is that secondary in India is a pain to deal with. Forget the paperwork, but getting board approved a block of stock to sell in the open market, which has not been refused, which has been refused by all other investors. I think that is a pain to do. If it's a hot company, then existing investors typically just preempt that.
Yep,
ropers and all of those that exist, right? So it's hard. Plus, the SEBI also has an issue, right, Utsav, on just creating a secondary marketplace?
Secondary marketplace, but offline you can close transactions.
Offline, of course, you can close, yeah.
Yep. I think what I've heard from some of the founders is
stock exchange sort of thing, because if you start a secondary stock market where people are bidding and putting up offers and bids, that becomes sort of like a pseudo stock exchange, and they're not okay with that, where price discovery happens online.
So if it's going to come up, it's going to come up with the SEBI's blessings only. Yeah. I think with that, let's just jump to few audience questions. I think one thing that Yash, I think, wants to know is that if you just had to take basis the readings of the budget, right, which sectors or which industries do you think will start booming after the budget? I think you had mentioned one, I think, on the infra side, and we have discussed, I think, on the insurance one, but are there any other sector that you see that, okay, they see a significant upside due to the budget?
Yeah, I think there are lots of supply chains which are becoming, look, there's going to be a lot of spending that's going to happen by the government in various sectors. And overall, I think the B2B supply chains are going to become very interesting and robust going forward. So companies that can organize that or build services around that could be very interesting. So one of the things that we are calling it Off Business for X. Off Business is one of our portfolio companies that's done very well, which organizes the cement supply chain or the steel supply chain, helps SMEs work with other SMEs, and provides a financial services angle to it as well. I think those kinds of things will become very interesting over a period of time in multiple supply chains as more investments by the government, etc., happens in some of those. That could be an interesting one.
So, Vidit, you want to take a shot at this?
No, yeah, I don't think I have a lot of context on this, but I think I'll pass to the other guys to kind of answer this one.
To be honest, I mean, sectors in terms of, I mean, the startup side of things, I think not direct impact in terms of any sector getting specifically boosted. I mean, COVID has generally sort of benefited the tech ecosystem and adoption in the country. So I think overall we'll see broad, like sort of tailwinds for most sectors where adoption, like for e-commerce, ed tech, and all of these sectors have been, I mean, accelerated by a few years now, actually. So all of those are direct beneficiaries of the time that we've been through. But I don't think budget, I mean, has a direct impact on anything related to the startups for now.
All right. I'll take another question. I think Karthik is asking about the implications of the OPC rule changes, right? One, I think, has been that the NRI limits around NRIs kind of setting up the number of days has been reduced. The amount of money until which they can hit before which they need to convert has changed. This seems like an interesting concept, but what do you see on ground? What do you see in terms of reality? Do you see startups coming to you registered as OPCs and then converting? Like, what happens with OPCs?
No chance.
I've never seen a startup come. I've maybe even seen one or two startup registered as an LLP, limited liability partnership, but never. I think over the last, I don't know, OPC I think came into the existence like 2-3 years back, but never I think have seen a company which is doing that.
I don't even know if you can fund one. So I think it's a non-event, that one. At least
You
for
probably convert them, but what you're saying is that they don't even come to you as an OPC and then convert to private, like doesn't even show up on the radar.
So I think, we are a very limited part of the startup, so to say, right? VC funded or angel funded startups. For that perspective, it's a non-event. But maybe for others, it could be.
Got it. Awesome. I think Shamnayak has one question. I think I want to add this to you, Rajat, that when let's say a new startup is kind of setting up, what are some of the most common legal aspects that they need to kind of be wary of? What are some of the most common advice that you need to give to like a startup that you're funding in, let's say the seed round or a series A round itself? What are the things they need to be careful about?
Get a good lawyer and a company secretary. That's the
Absolutely.
So company secretary and all of this is important to set things up properly right up front. I don't know if there is any specific things that come to mind which are problematic as such, but some of this angel tax kind of things used to be a pain, but nowadays everybody just gets that Startup India certificate and manages that. So nothing specific comes to mind, but it's important to just get a good CS.
Awesome. Got it. And I think related to this, Shubham has a question around the angel tax exemption, that it's quite complex with all the offerings of Startup India. And is there a simple way for them to understand? Maybe does AngelList probably help with some of these aspects itself?
We've listed some of it on angel.co/India, but I think the better way to do is just, do a quick search. I think they'll give you like a quick understanding of how fair market value and share price is calculated to come to this understanding that you're actually investment is calculated as income and you might have to pay as a tax in that. So I think if you just do a quick search, I think you'll get this easily.
Awesome. And the last question I want to take, which is interesting, is from this perspective, right? The question is around the role of big tech, cloud computing, especially in growth of startups. But I want to twist this question a little bit. One of the most common stats is that almost, I think, 30 to 40% of most startups funding goes into paying Microsoft, Google with the cloud cost and everything, right? The cloud ads and whatnot. You've seen anything happening here? Any way that you've been able to reduce some of this cost, or is this like, okay, accept it, you have to pay this? A lot of investments will go there.
Crypto, which India is making it hard again.
Yeah, I don't know if. So look, there are credits and all available initially, but at least for the initial part, as long as you know some folks or you're funded, you could potentially get some credits. There is debt available against those, so to fund some of those transactions now. You don't need to fund fund all of those Facebook and AWS spends through equity. So that's an interesting development that's recently happened.
Revenue-based financing.
Revenue-based financing, yeah. But in the absence of that, I don't know. Till you get an Indian cloud player, but even then, why would you shift? It's just very hard.
I would probably just say that I think they should come and pitch to Rajat. You get in, I'm sure Matrix Partners companies have like a lot of these offers available. So maybe make use of that.
All of them exhaust them in 6 months, and then suddenly, oh no, there is.
It's not accountable.
Renegotiate your deal, Rajat.
And it can add up. I mean, some of the, these content companies have cloud bills like I've never seen before. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah, no, content companies, the Zoom for X, which is the big thing over the last year or so, it's crazy the amount of tech spends that these tech bills these guys are having.
Yep, one of my friends recently started his announced his deep tech product Rephrase.ai, and I think for each video to be created, it's like a real amount of cost. Like other startups don't think about their per API call cost, but for each API call which generates a video, the cost is like in double-digit dollars, which ends up being quite high.
Yeah. Actually, you know, one of the other things that's happened is both the AWS and the Google teams, at least, are very, very helpful in trying to optimize on these costs, right? So they've helped multiple of our portfolio companies just think through the architecture, think through what tools they could use. So if anyone wants to reach out to them, please feel free to reach out. I can connect. But they've been very good in managing some of this.
Sounds good. With that, I think we'll bring this session to a close. We will be putting up this session, I think, on YouTube, probably putting up some of the transcripts, etc. also. But thanks a lot for your time, Utsav, Rajat, Vidit. It was great talking to you on this. I hope this was a non-fluff and non-generic Gyan session for most of the people and not like one of those general budget sessions. But in case anyone has any further questions, please feel free to write to us on Twitter. We are happy to kind of take these questions up. I know Utsav particularly is quite active on Twitter, so we can catch hold of him over there also. But with that, I think we'll bring this to a close. And thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot for your time. It was great talking to you all.